So I should, first of all, again, just thank you for your hospitality and tell you, I just texted my mom and said, I just had the potluck to which all other potlucks must aspire. That is an extraordinary event, so lovely. So thank you, because that is absolutely a labor of love and much appreciated. And what a just fantastically warm, engaged, wonderful congregation you have here, community that you have built. So this afternoon, we're going to kind of go down the rabbit hole that is consuming many of our lives, certainly in education. Teaching will never look the same post AI. And I just want to be clear to begin with, this is not going to be an English teacher up here ranting against AI. AI is here. We have to figure out how to deal with it. So I'm sort of changing up what I had planned to do today, because I have a feeling this is a conversation that I want to hear from all of you too. We are all in this together. We're all learning how to navigate it together. I talk to my students about that all the time. I probably apologize to them too much. I apologize on behalf of the universe that they stepped into such a complicated moment as college students, and it is not their fault that it's complicated to know what tools are appropriate tools in what moments, how we're doing the thing. As I said to the freshmen during Jumpstart this year, that teaching right now, and even being students, right, feels like that everybody is lined up to begin a stage of the Tour de France, and one person is on a regular bicycle, and another person is on a bicycle that has a tiny little motor hidden in the stem, and another person is sitting on a Harley Davidson, and off we go. And how do you judge that race, right? Because there are so many different tools. So that's where we are, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. So again, part of my approach is to engage the students in these conversations and thinking philosophically, critically, analytically about what work matters, right? What do we offload? What do we not offload, right? And there are no right and wrong answers. Well, there are in the context of classrooms. The right answer is you do what your teacher tells you to do. But in the grand scheme of things, it's hard to know. These students are having to develop discernment about things that they are not necessarily mature enough to be able to discern, right? That's part of their journey in college, is to figure out how to make those kinds of decisions. So my freshmen in college writing classes, just this year, I started having them write for me in class, just as an early assignment, an AI autobiography. Just asking them, what is your experience with this tool? And I get the most fascinating responses, because again, I'm promising them that this is not a gotcha kind of assignment. I really want to know what their journey has been. And so I'll get these stories about, well, I was a freshman in high school when I first heard about this thing, and I just dismissed it, and I was never going to touch it, and then all my friends were using it, but I still wasn't gonna, and then I tried it, and then I start getting this language of addiction. I mean, again, this is just them talking, and then once I started using it, I didn't trust my own voice anymore, right? So these are the interesting conversations we are part of. So one of my tools for just making them comfortable talking about the complexity is, no surprise, looking at literature that helps us think about these things from a kind of safe distance. Narrative, right? The power of storytelling, so that then these students can engage with these questions in a way that feels, open and welcoming. So I'm going to start today by sharing one of those stories, one of those works of literature that I think has really interesting spiritual connotations, and it's just fascinating to me. And then instead of moving directly into the second piece of literature that I'm prepared to talk about, I really want to just have a conversation about what this piece of literature sort of sparks in you, sort of thoughts, insights, your experiences with this tool, your hopes and dreams for our students. How should we be teaching them in this moment to be human, but also to be using the tools in effective ways? And then if there's time, I should say too, I've even brought, this was kind of a last minute thought, but just at the end of this week, the academic administration has sent out for review from all of the faculty and staff, well, mostly faculty, I think in this case, a new AI philosophy statement that we've just been working on. I happen to be on the committee that's working on that. And so if you're interested, we could even spend a little bit of time looking at what we're saying, and if I could get feedback from you if what we're saying makes sense, right? Because we're up there in our little ivory tower thinking we know what's good for these students, but in the real world it might look different. So that's just a little bit of a vision of where I hope to go this afternoon. But let's start, because I promised it in my title, and maybe this is why you're here, let's start by talking about some science fiction. Beginning with some definitional work. Some of you might be sci-fi fans, others not so much. I can't claim that this is a world that I spend a lot of time in, although I do love Star Trek. But other than that, there are just a few pieces that I've found super helpful in helping students think forward. So Isaac Asimov calls it that branch of literature which is concerned with the impact of scientific advance upon human beings. So fairly straightforward. He says, modern science fiction is the only form of literature that consistently considers the nature of the changes that face us, the possible consequences, and the possible solutions. I love that. As a genre, it's looking at the inevitability of change and how we're going to deal with it. Another science fiction writer says, on the one side of literature lies fantasy. Fantasy is about the realm of the impossible. We don't read fantasy because we're interested in realism, right? We read fantasy because it's never going to be possible, and that's the fun, that's the escape. On the other side lie all the forms of fiction that are representing the actual. That would be realism, right? Realist novels where we recognize the characters, we recognize the situations. Science fiction's domain, he says, is what is possible. So that's different from fantasy, that these things might become true, but they let us think about what the consequences will be. Another science fiction writer says, at its best, science fiction is the medium in which our miserable certainty that tomorrow will be different from today in ways that we can't predict can be transmuted to a sense of excitement and anticipation, occasionally even evolving into awe. So again, I don't know whether you resonate with those definitions or statements about science fiction, those of you who have read any, but I think it's a nice place to start. So, very, very briefly, just to get you situated in terms of the story we're going to be looking at this afternoon, science fiction has been around for as long as people have been writing. We've been imagining what might be possible. It's part of that spark of imagination. So ancient Indian epics, like the Ramayana, talk about flying machines, right? They're imagining things that are long time from ever happening. Jumping more current, I teach Frankenstein all the time, that sort of, which kind of qualifies as a kind of science fiction because, of course, it's a way of creating life through a kind of technology. Jules Verne, you can see that the late 19th century suddenly has a flood of science fiction writers. And I don't think that's any accident. It's towards the end of the scientific, right, the sort of industrial age where all kinds of things are changing so fast that people are panicked about how those changes are going to impact society. Just even having people punching clocks in factories shatters and changes the way we think about the world, right? So there's lots of people at the end of the 19th century who are thinking about what the future might look like if the industrialization continues. And I think we're in a very similar moment right now, right? That suddenly something is happening in our world that we can't quite get our hands around, and it's happening faster than we know how to deal with it. So in 1909, E.M. Forster writes a little short story called The Machine Stops. Now, some of you may know the name E.M. Forster from other contexts, especially he's more of a novelist, late 19th, early 20th century, famously writes things like A Room with a View, Howard's End, A Passage to India. So again, he's famous for his novels. He is not famous as a science fiction writer. His other novels are very much set in reality. So this little story in 1909 is just fascinating. It was published by the Oxford and Cambridge Review. It was republished in 1973 in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. So this little story had, got some legs. I encountered this story because I was supposed to be teaching a class on environmental literature when I was teaching at PUC. And I was asking a colleague about some things that, might be relevant to students. And she says, man, I think E.M. Forster wrote this thing about these people who are living underground in little cells. So she was thinking about, the impact of not living on, in nature. But it turns out this story has so much resonance for what's been happening in the whole digital age and in the age of AI. So, as I just said, this story is set underground. This image was pulled from online, as you can see, from a short film that was made about the short story. But it begins with the lines, imagine, if you can, a small room, hexagonal in shape, like the cell of a bee. It is lighted neither by window nor by lamp, yet it is filled with a soft radiance. So completely enclosed, isolated spaces. As we enter the story, and there are only 2 characters in the story, so it's very easy to keep track of, Vashti is the name of the mother who is in that room, and she describes doing things like touching the isolation knob so that nobody could speak to her, touching a lighting apparatus, and then having her son, whose name is Kuno, call her up on her, what looks for all the world like an iPad, so they can talk over Zoom. 1909. Don't forget, written in 1909. So, the telephone had been invented, but very few people were using it in that moment. So this is the world that E.M. Forster is imagining, a world where we live in isolation from each other and talk to each other over tablets and can see each other's pictures. You see here, she's saying it was full 15 seconds before that plate she was holding in her hand began to glow. Presently, she could see the image of her son, who lived on the other side of the earth and could see her. So, pretty remarkable. And he's very frustrated because he keeps wanting his mother to come visit. And she keeps saying, no, why should I come visit you? I can see you on the screen. You can imagine this was a fun story to teach during COVID, right? Were all those Zoom meetings with family members fully satisfying? Right? Those Zoom classes certainly were not, right? So it was just so much fun to have students engage with this story during that time. He's like, I've called you before, Mother, but you were always so busy or in isolation, right? You cannot call me now. And she's like, oh, what's the problem? Be quick about it. Why couldn't you send it by pneumatic post? Sounds to me like email. Right? So again, he's imagining a world where we don't even have to speak to each other. We can just send emails. And he's like, but I want to see you. She's like, but I can see you. He's like, I want to see you not through the machine. I want to speak to you not through the wearisome machine. She said, oh, hush, don't say anything bad about the machine. Right? And this is a little bit later on in the story, but then he says, you talk as if a god had made the machine. I believe that you pray to it when you are unhappy. Men made it. Don't forget that. Right? The machine is much, but it is not everything. I see something like you in the plate, but I do not see you. I hear something like you through the telephone, but I do not hear you. That is why I want you to come, pay me a visit, so that we can meet face to face and talk about the hopes that are in my mind. And she's like, I don't have time. Again, I don't know why I picked these stories for Mother's Day. I'm so sorry. Weird. All right. Later in the story, she finally decides she's going to go visit him. And they have these flying machines that she can actually get out of her little room and go through some tunnels and get on this flying machine and end up in another place on the planet, right? But we discover when she is there with other people that she's just horrified when one of the assistants on that flying machine reaches out to steady her when there's a little bit of, jostling around, because she's not used to human touch. They've completely lost track. And again, we had these conversations during COVID. Are we going to go back to shaking hands? Well, it turns out we did really fast, right? Whether it was the right thing to do or not, we crave that kind of touch. But here she's like, how dare you touch me? People at this time never touched one another. what I find even more interesting in this place where she is journeying, there are windows in this plane, but they always keep the shades down, always. And once her metal blind malfunctions and the window goes up, and she's like, oh, please cover that. They're flying over the Himalayas. And she says, oh, these mountains give me no ideas. Because the only ideas are the ones in the machine. And in this worldview, the natural world, the world that is not the machine, has no value. So she keeps looking out and seeing things. No ideas here, she says. In the evening, she looked again. They were crossing a golden sea in which lay many small islands and one peninsula. She repeated, no ideas here, and hid Greece behind a metal blind. Right? The cradle of Western philosophy. No ideas there. It's not in the machine. So, again, the story continues. They finally have a conversation with each other, and Kuno keeps saying, but we created the machine to do our will, but it is not doing our will now. So you can see that the story is anticipating the conversations that we are having today about whether or not AI is going to take over the universe and destroy us as we know it, right? Will it become more intelligent with us? But again, 1909, he's thinking about this. A really, really important concept that shows up towards the end of this story is this: why don't they go outside? And it becomes philosophically important to this civilization to beware of firsthand ideas, experiencing things in person. Direct observation is no longer valued. What we value is, well, in fact, she says here, firsthand ideas do not really exist. They're just physical impressions produced by love and fear. And on this gross foundation, who could erect a philosophy? Let your ideas be secondhand, and if possible, tenth hand, for then they will be far removed from that disturbing element, direct observation. Man, when I'm talking to students now about AI, even when we're doing research and talking about what is the function of AI in research, it's like the further away you get from the original study, right? And we're talking here AI is just, it's not even second, third, fourth hand, it's just pulling from everywhere, right? So that kind of distance, again, he was anticipating. So there comes this point in the story where they all begin to worship the machine. That's no great surprise. They say the machine feeds us and clothes us and houses us. Though we speak to one another, through it we see one another, in it we have our being. The machine is the friend of ideas and the enemy of superstitions. The machine is omnipotent and eternal. Blessed is the machine, right? So it becomes their religion. The word religion, of course, was avoided. And in theory, the machine was still the creation and the implement of man. But in practice, all save a few retrogrades worshipped it as divine. Well, again, it won't surprise you to know that the machine starts to break down at some point. The machine just begins to crumble, but at first they don't notice it, right? And of course, nobody knows how to fix the machine, because long ago, all of those books have been thrown away. And so everything begins to go silent. And we see here Vashti say that she had never known silence, because there'd always been the hum, the noise, the voices from the machine, and it nearly killed her. Right? So at this point, again, this is dystopian, right? Dystopian literature. Everything is going to begin to fall apart. Everything crashes in the end. And the two of them finally actually connect at the end of the story and wept for humanity, not just for themselves. They could not bear that this should be the end. Ere silence was completed, their hearts were opened, and they knew what had been important on the earth. Man, the flower of all flesh, the noblest of all creatures visible, man who had once made God in his image. Beautiful naked man was dying, strangled in the garments he had woven. Century after century had he toiled, and here was his reward. Truly the garment had seemed heavenly at first, and heavenly it had been so long as it was a garment and no more. Man could shed it at will and live by the essence that is his soul, and the essence equally divine that is his body. Finally, in the end, it's just chaos. Everything's breaking down. The whole hive is breaking apart. She's crying out for him. His voice in the darkness says, I'm here. Is there any hope? And he says, none for us. Where are you? She crawled over the bodies of the dead. Quicker, he gasped, I am dying. But we touch. We talk. Not through the machine. And that's where the story ends. Not a happy one, right? But it raises so many interesting questions about some of the concerns that we have as we are moving through this transition to an age when we're becoming even more dependent on a new kind of machine, right? So let me just pause here, again, recognizing that you haven't had a chance to read the story for yourself. The whole story, it's on the long end as short stories go. It's about a 30-page read, but all you have to do is just Google E.M. Forster and the machine stops, and see the beauty of the machine. It'll pop up for you, so you're welcome to read it. If you're old school like me, I have a couple of copies here if anybody wants them. But anyway, so any just observations, reflections, reactions to that story and that take on the possible future before we go on? Maybe too broad of a question.
What about the psychology of people?
Same thing we were seeing even thinking about icons, right? You're right. Humans are humans. We fall prey to this. Maybe there's nothing new.
Ironically,
Not
sure if it's on. Ironically, it made me think of yesterday on the machine,
Yeah.
watching clips of the greatest naturalist probably of our era, David Attenborough's 100th birthday.
Yep.
And what it does is the machine tells you, yeah, this is a great guy, but it reminds you, you've got to go out and experience the nature.
Yes.
It's not enough to watch David Attenborough do it.
Right. As great as that is.
As great as that is, and it is probably the greatest, certainly in our time.
Yeah.
But this is sort of that's my observation.
Yeah.
The machine's great.
Yeah.
It reminds us
Right.
of things that we should know of,
Sure.
but it is not a substitute for reality.
For actual firsthand experience. There's quite a few writers who've been thinking about the psychology of a lot of this. One author, Richard Love, who initially wrote the book The Last Child in the Woods, talking about children who don't go outside and play anymore. This is old stuff, 10, 15 years ago, right? But he talks about the importance of developing the hybrid mind. That it's absolutely important to be knowledgeable about technology, to be able to use technology, to leverage it to, for the good that it can do, but you also have to be able to get outside and experience the real world. Because that activates completely different centers in our brains, and now I'm off on a subject that I truly am not an expert in, but taking his word for it, that just even 20 minutes outside rewires the things that happen to our brains when we spend all of our time inside staring at a screen. Great observation. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Is this on?
It's not on yet.
Can we get this
there
working?
it is.
There we are.
Now it's on.
Nothing like reality.
I think sometimes maybe it's the evangelistic methodology we use. Is that coming through? And that is that we try to get people to comprehend rather than apprehend. I grew up as a missionary's kid in a different culture entirely. And in Japan, truth is apprehended more than comprehended.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at what Jesus was saying to the Pharisees, he was saying the same thing.
Yeah.
He didn't say, I have the truth. What did he say? I am the truth. In other words, my computer doesn't have any personality. It's, disconnecting from apprehension to comprehension. For about 12 years, I subscribed to Scientific American. And it was amazing how many things you can apprehend in there that nobody has a way to comprehend it.
Yeah.
The
excellent
stars.
point.
I don't know if you saw when Elon Musk introduced his son. Did you see that thing? And he was asking, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but he was asking his son a question, and his son gave a Christian answer about God. Where is God? Can you build a rock bigger than God can lift, et cetera?
Right.
And that, it was from the mouth of babes. Elon Musk was left speechless. It was really fun to watch. And I think everybody on Sunday morning, the preachers all had that as part of their sermon.
So part of my question here is, how do we find that balance, and how do we train our students and our children to find that balance of leveraging the parts of technology, the parts of AI, that in fact, as some people will argue, leave us more time to do the human work, because we're not busy work that AI is very good at doing. But how do we teach that particular discernment? How do we teach ourselves to find that balance? I don't know if any of you have particular experiences that are helpful with that.
I'm not particularly enamored with AI because I went through a generation that was enamored with something else. I wasn't too enamored then because I'm a sensible person. But anyway, I do feel a little distant from what's happening with AI because I'm no longer, for about 10 years, I've been out of the high school classroom. And when you're around teenagers, certainly at high school classroom, anything you need to know, they know.
There you go.
And that's, if you want to know about AI, they can tell you the truth about it all.
They can tell you all about it.
That's right.
Yep.
The reason I'm not enamored is I can remember when, if you could just get an Apple IIe, the problems of the world would go away. And we were going to have a paperless society. Everything, all this data was going to be kept on cassette tapes. And then, miracle of miracles, we've got, these 5 1/4 floppy disks. And now, we've got 3.5-inch disks. I was with a bunch of teachers. We put our computers together. So get into the computer age. Snap some parts in and so forth. And the big question was, should I have a 20 meg hard drive or a 30 meg hard drive? And the person who was piloting this project said, 20 meg. That'll hold more than you'd ever need. Yeah. And it wasn't long before you couldn't even get WordPerfect to go on a hard drive that way. Yeah. And I suppose the key thing there to me is we're going to have a paperless society. We use more paper now than we ever did. You used to, when you needed to type something, you went and needed paper, you go to the business supply store, and way at the back of the store, you'd get maybe that much typing paper. Yep. Nowadays, when you go in, they have boxes of reams of paper waiting for you to buy it. Yeah. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm not sure it's the magic it is. Yep. I will tell you this. And I did my first real orientation to this was I went and heard a journalist from New York speak about AI is coming, and her message was you can't believe anything.
Okay.
you can't trust anything
Right.
on AI. And this was before even it was being reported in the media.
Right.
And she was telling other young journalists
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And what has happened to me is because this is so untrustworthy, then I don't think I can trust anything on the internet.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
a scary place.
Yeah.
I presume that she would also argue that a place where a society no longer trusts any source of information is a very dangerous place to be.
Now, you did ask what kind of an anchor do you use? And maybe this is the wrong kind of an anchor, but long before you and I were a gleam in our parents' eyes, the book of Daniel, for example, was a fantasy. You got Daniel in the lion's den, and you've got the 3 Hebrews in the fiery furnace. It's all legendary and myth, etc., etc., etc. And the key to this is a bunch of hooey, is Nebuchadnezzar never existed. There's absolutely no evidence that Nebuchadnezzar ever existed. This was the data at the time. There was no records of him in the Syrian records or any information that we have. But somebody believed that. They hung on to their faith, and they went and they dug the guy up there in Babylon, and found the town, the city of Babylon, scraped the tiles off of the entrance to the gate and took them to Berlin. And you can go to Berlin and walk right through those same the same tiles that Daniel and the 3 guys would. So I do not know if this is a solid approach, but I'm not ready to give up, let's say, on anchors that systems and so forth that have worked for me, and I've talked enough. So here you go.
So I think you're absolutely right that it has become our most important task as educators to teach exact information literacy, right? It did not used to be my primary job as an English teacher, but now teaching how to recognize valid, credible, right, reliable information is our most important job now, because you're absolutely right that you cannot believe your eyes anymore. You have to have other anchors on which to attach. Yeah.
I'm wondering if, a lot of people put blame on AI, but maybe just AI shines a light on us and our culture a little bit.
Interesting, yeah.
We have a lot of this promise because people see what it's capable of.
Yeah.
And so now we have an expectation that's not realistic.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to go down to 3-hour work weeks.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be in the top 1% of.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening is people aren't working less because of AI.
Right.
They're figuring, I can get ahead more. And people are working harder because of it.
Yeah.
So does that maybe cast a light on us and maybe expose areas that we're already kind of weak in? I don't know.
Or our kind of value system culturally. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Looks like a couple of hands over here. Yeah, and of course, every technology has always promised less work and has always led to more work. That's been consistent for a long time.
Depends on how you see the machine.
Yeah.
50 years ago, if you had a phone, there's no one there to answer it, you'd not get nothing.
Correct.
And then you had answering machines. But now you have access to everyone immediately.
Yeah.
All you have to do is use it. And you get almost an immediate answer.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the machine doesn't isolate us, but brings us closer.
Connects us. One can argue that.
So it depends on what kind of personality you have, whether you like that or you don't like that.
Yeah, it's true. And again, some of our students will find, and I'm sure you know this is true from your own experience, that to suddenly be without it can be incredibly disorienting because we're not used to other forms of connection. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, because you're professor, an English professor, correctly, I'm a writer, and I
Yes.
love to write.
Yes.
but I'm very upset with the fact that AI can do it now. And people are writing books, they're doing things. All they have to do is put a few thoughts in there and they weave a story.
Yep.
How do you deal with that in the classroom?
This is what consumes my world right now, which again, not what I was trained to do. I'm with you. Love that writing process, the hard, messy work of having thoughts.
Yes.
Which is hard work. And what AI does is make that work look so easy.
Yeah.
Right? And again, we can no longer hide behind the idea that AI just doesn't do it well enough. Are you kidding me? It can write any freshman level paper better than, we cannot pretend that it cannot do the work. Yeah. But it makes it look easy. And so that question of what work is actually valuable work, recognizing that freshmen have hated freshman writing classes for all time. I will admit that. So are we clinging to something that was actually never important to begin with? Or is that hard, messy work of organizing your thoughts, testing your thoughts, putting those thoughts on paper, is that now far more important than writing them beautifully? Because AI can sure do that, right? Will I be sad if I never have to teach grammar again? Interesting question, right? Because teaching grammar is not my favorite part. My favorite part is getting students excited about the ideas. Yeah. But on the other hand, you probably know that the crafting of the sentence is an incredibly important part of having a thought. Yeah. Yeah. How do you separate the two?
Yeah. And I had one other thing I wanted to say. Yeah. Have you read any of Rene Nurembergen, I think, his writings?
I don't think so.
Well, it's out of print, one of his books that I absolutely love, and I've read it 3 times, and I loan it to people, and it disappears, and I have to buy it again, and anyway, I'm on my 3rd one.
That's great.
But he is a person that has done a lot of study in like what happened after the antediluvians, and he's gone into a lot of research of what they have found, archaeologists, because anyway, it's not there. Anyway, they will find things and they can't explain it, so they throw them aside and they call them ooparts, out of place something, anyway. Yeah, artifacts, And it's fascinating. Inside the sarcophagus of the children, they'll find an aeronomically designed airplane as a toy. And then he goes into the cultures that followed that and in their native writings and things they talk about. And if we ever think we're so bright right now, we're not. We have no concept of how intelligent those people were and what existed before the flood. And I'm saying that because, as in the days of Noah, now we are maybe with all of these thousands of years that have followed, people are picking up on other people's ideas and adding to them, and now here we are with AI and all of that. Those people probably had all of that. And now we're down to a point where I think it's really another proof we're living in the end.
Well, that's certainly an interesting perspective to think that that this is not new. As new as it may feel.
I'm personally against AI because I think they're going to do away with jobs, and we need jobs. Yeah. And important jobs are going to be the jobs we have, such as lawyers, prosecutors, and judges. Well, if AI takes over using Palantir and flock cameras, they'll get together. They will become the lawyer, the prosecutor, the judge, and then the AI will be the judge based on our past, what we've done, where we've gone, and it will say where they think we're going to go, and will judge us instead of the Lord judging us. And that's a dangerous place when it comes to this type of machine or whatever.
That is a dystopian vision right there, indeed. Take a couple of more hands. Go ahead.
Yeah, your question was, how do we teach, I guess, younger people?
The discernment necessary.
How to balance this all.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that one way, it's something I'm not always good at, is modeling it myself. I remember taking a walk with my daughter Kim when she was 5 years old. We're walking through the neighborhood, and we were always talking, and I asked her, "So, do you understand the stoplights?" "Oh, yeah." I said, "Okay, what does green mean?" "Go." "What does red mean?" "Stop." "Well, what does yellow mean?" "Go faster." And I said, "Where did you learn that?" She said,
Observation.
"Mom." But, I think it's, my grandchildren watch everything I do.
Yeah.
They are watching to see how I live my life. And I know it's not always an easy thing, but I think modeling is very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. I think there's a hand over there, and then maybe I'll turn our attention to a philosophy statement.
So I'm a teacher as well, and I go on a lot of field trips.
Aha.
And I taught middle school for 11 years before I moved over here. And I always took my students on an overnight field trip where Wi-Fi was disabled, which is my favorite part of it.
Yeah.
After COVID, my favorite field trip that I've ever been on was probably the hardest because they had been in COVID for a year and a half, and they had to figure out how to relate to each other without phones. Yeah. And
Wow.
I've been teaching for 22 years. Yeah. That's probably the most impactful thing I've done.
Yeah. Wow.
So with talking about AI and the education, there's a lot to be said for what's going on with the development of children and and the effects are still being seen. All the anxiety and depression that just skyrocketed through that, and so that should also be in the forefront of people's minds, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you for that super important perspective. It's sort of like, again, Richard Love says that the more technology we have, the more nature we need. And I would say that's true for relationships too. So I'm not in despair about the world, right? I know that we've been through hard things before, but that really intentional leaning into, they're going to get the technology on their own, but us leading into making sure they have other kinds of experiences becomes more and more part of our jobs. Yeah.
I just wanted to build off what RJ said earlier a little bit. I can think of 3 different things just as examples that were developments. If I think about the artificial Christmas tree, many people choose it.
Yeah.
But I think most people, on some level, miss the real tree, even if they choose the artificial one. I think about Home Depot and all the things you can buy on the shelf that used to get milled by people like Jay by hand.
Yeah.
I don't know that most people think it's better at Home Depot, but it is easier.
Right.
I think about my first college roommate at Andrews, who I didn't know I got paired with him, and he would spend hours on AOL Instant Messenger messaging some girl in the girls' dorm. And I kept thinking, just go see the girl. But I think he was afraid of something, right? And I think at our core as humans, way beyond AI, we have this, it's like we're wired to avoid pain and avoid things almost as much as we go for something. And so to me, an interesting question, a way of looking at it is not so much speculating where it's going to go, as wherever it goes, it's going to provide easy ways out. And what are the things in life that are good and excellent that I'm willing to compromise on, and which ones am I not?
Yeah. That's an excellent point. All of those incredibly difficult, high-level decisions, right, that we are now, again, I tell my students this, that you are now facing decisions you didn't used to have to make. Right? And a lot of the scholars that talk about students and education are saying, and it is not fair to put that burden on the students, right? So how do then we as teachers have to take back that responsibility to help them navigate those decisions that, again, just a few years ago we weren't even having to think about.
We have to take one more from the church AI expert.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad.
I am very fortunate that I started writing a lot before AI became a thing.
Yeah.
And I've found this craving for writing that I know is human authored.
Yeah.
Because I view all AI writing at this stage as the average of the mediocre.
Yep.
And I'd rather read the imperfect from a
Yes.
human.
Yeah.
And that's how I want to write. I have no
Yes.
interest in writing what ChatGPT will give me.
Right.
And I find myself just excitedly putting out my messy prose, trying to
Yes.
wrestle through it
Yeah.
to get my own ideas out.
Yeah.
More so than ever before. And we've had garbage writing for
Yep.
millennia.
Yep.
It's nothing new. So when I see things like this, when I see things written 100 years ago, I actually have a little bit more hope of maybe it will encourage more of us to connect with each other, connect with, we don't believe in the muse, but our version of that to try and write things that are inspiring for others.
Yeah, yeah. And we're seeing that, I'm already seeing some of that backlash in students. Many of the students hate this stuff, right? I'm not saying that all the students show up and are trying to cheat by using AI. That's really a pretty small number of students because there is this kind of craving for what is real, what is human. And so the challenge for us as teachers is to make sure that we are also privileging that messy process in our grading. Because forever we have been grading for the perfection. And the perfection is no longer the thing that matters, because that is easily reproducible, easily fixable by the machine. So now we have to adjust the way we are thinking about that. We need to be figuring out how to assess the process, as messy as the process is, rather than the final product. That's a shift. We can do that shift. It's slow. Teachers are very slow to change, right? But that's the kind of shift that does have to be happening as we make this transition. So let me just briefly show you, we won't linger necessarily long on this, but I thought, again, you might be interested to see how we're wrestling with this question at the university. There is an AI task force that thinks about how to help the institution as a whole engage with these questions. Obviously, the answers are going to be different in every different department. Every different discipline uses the tools differently, so you cannot have any kind of clear statement about what you can and cannot do. But we have said here, and again, please know this is just a draft. You guys are seeing it before many of the faculty at the institution. It got sent to them, but I don't think they read it this week yet. Anyway, so it's saying that we understand, I'm starting with the second sentence, that innovations such as generative AI will inevitably create points of tension, but that it is our responsibility to both use and teach the discernment necessary to apply our foundational principles. So I'm going back to that those anchors that you were talking about. Our foundational principles to these important questions. The questions matter. The questions are interesting. We cannot just assume that students have figured out an answer to these questions. We have to engage it. For example, we recognize the complexity of finding balance between celebrating the human achievement that leads to technological innovation while continuing to protect and cultivate our God-given powers of intelligence. We also recognize the need to maintain our commitment to stewardship as we seek to balance technological convenience, which we were just mentioning, against the environmental and human resources, like having jobs, right, required to power those technologies. Finally, we acknowledge the complexity of determining when engaging AI opens new opportunities for innovation and when AI use replaces or stifles human creativity. So those tensions are just there all the time. That's not a bad thing. We just have to be acknowledging, right, the fact that that is true. So then this next statement, which is a little bit more narrowly specific to the college, to university settings, it talks about some core principles that, for one, that we were just talking about, academic excellence depends on being able to verify the credibility and acknowledge the source of all information. AI makes that hard. So we have to train students. We can't just say you can't use AI in your research class, right? Because they're going to find a way to use it anyway. But you have to be spending lots of time explaining why that source is not credible and trustworthy, and finding ways to make that important to them. So that means seeking the highest quality information, right, through research. I'm going to skip over some of that. Instructors committed to careful instruction must think systematically about which tools best support learning objectives. Every day in the classroom, we're having to think about, what is the toolkit for this assignment? We can't just make a statement in our syllabus saying no use of AI here or some use of AI here. Every assignment I give, I have to be explaining to them what tools work, what tools are appropriate for this stage in the process. Again, I didn't used to have to do that, but now we're having to think about those things. And then the students are supposed to respect our expertise and our choices and do what we ask them to do. To ensure fair assessment of academic achievement, teachers must be clear about which tools are appropriate for any given task, and the students must follow those guidelines. And then finally, and for me, this is one of the most important things, fostering the unique gifts of every individual requires that instructors and students be committed to a growth mindset that values the process of learning, not just the product, as we've just said. This process requires effort, including the willingness to engage in the work essential to genuine learning. And again, it's that desire to offload work, to not have the pain, right? That's the universe that terrifies me, that if we aren't willing to do hard things, right? So those are kind of the middle statements. And then this is the end. Like I say, this is just a draft, so we're open for feedback. The application of these principles are going to look different in different contexts, disciplines, and levels of learning, right? In a foundational writing class, I might allow no tools, right? I don't want them having Grammarly rewrite all of their sentences when I'm trying to teach them how to write sentences. There are other departments that are like, please use the Grammarly. We do not want to have to be dealing with that stuff, right? So again, constantly looking at those principles because they're not necessarily teaching the writing. But a higher level class might be asking students to engage with those tools. And then finally, while AI is remarkably efficient at generating information, it does not possess the wisdom to know how or whether to use that information. That distinctly human work remains for each individual, gifted with the ability to navigate a unique journey of faith and discovery. Through this process of discernment, we engage in the sacred work of responsible citizenship, generous service, and a deep respect for the beauty and power of creation, whether human or divine. Those are some nice, pretty words. I think a lot of them are good words. But figuring out how to actually make that happen, right? That's a challenge. That's a significant challenge. So there may be things that you think are kind of missing out of that statement. It may surprise you that it's as broad as it is. Again, this is not intended to be a how are you going to teach your classes sort of statement, but at least a basic principle saying this is how we're thinking about it on this campus, for good or for ill. But this is going to be an ongoing conversation because, again, the conversation changes every day. New tools, new challenges. It keeps life interesting, very interesting, right? But I think we have to keep coming back to these foundations. So finally, as we're moving towards the end, I'm just gonna mention a book. Part of the joy of being. Oh, go ahead, please do. Oh, this one? So you've read it? Yay! That's where we're going. So I was going to say, what part of the joy of teaching, of coming here, is all the book recommendations that I've gotten from you all. It's been fantastic. After every presentation, somebody's come up with books, which is, I love that. So I'm basically going to leave you with a book recommendation without going through a lot of detail about it. Ishiguro has for a long time been writing about some really interesting issues having to do with technologies, whether it had to be cloning, other things like that. In 2020, while we were all in lockdown, started hearing all of these interviews with Ishiguro, well, it must have been 2021, but we were still in lockdown, about this new book that he had actually sent in for publication before COVID happened, which was, again, this kind of science fiction, remarkably prescient sort of idea. And so I was like, I teach a class on that deals with a lot of these kinds of issues, sort of, risks and rewards of this kind of progress. And so I was like, man, I've got to get my hands on this book. And so I read it when it first came out, and I will be teaching it again in a couple of weeks. When I taught it right after COVID, it had a certain resonance. I'm always interested to see whether that resonance is going to continue. It's shifted. I'll tell you why in just a moment. So this is the name of the book, Clara and the Sun. it is, in many ways, such a gentle, kind book, which is nice to see. But the basic premise here is, this book is narrated by an AI companion doll. Because these children, who are referred to as lifted, which means they have been to some degree, and it's never clear in the text what this looks like, they have been genetically improved. The wealthy parents have the money for lifted children. They don't have to go to school anymore. They learn online, which is what made the book so interesting in 2021 when it came out. So those kids who have been lifted are no longer having relationships in school with other children, so they need companion dolls to learn how to just interact with each other. Right? Fascinating premise for a novel, which brings with it so many interesting problems and challenges and even thinking about the psychology of humans and what is it that makes us human, because these companion dolls are good. They can give you lots and lots of companionship, right? As many people are finding now, that turns out they're willing to share a lot more with AI counselors than maybe their human counselor. And some people are finding AI relationships to be safer than real relationships, right? So we have this happening now in ways that Ishiguro hadn't even, fully, certainly we hadn't experienced at that time. So this book raises issues, many issues, including from the very time we meet Clara, who is in a store waiting to be bought as a companion doll. She's already being replaced by the next model, right? So this issue of us constantly being replaceable, and what does that look like? And what happens to these companion dolls when their owners, their companions, outgrow them, which is an interesting question too. But at the real heart of this novel, and I'm going to skip behind all kinds of these things for right now, what we end up discovering, and I don't want to give the entire book away, but the real heart of this novel is about the fact that we learn that Clara is really made as a kind of replacement for another child who had died, right, or is sick. Because these lifted kids, it turns out genetically it's a bad idea, and they're all getting sick. And so the question is, can you have interchangeable parts? What is it that makes a human soul, right? What makes a human human? If the AI, and the AI is very good at having conversations with people right now, right? We can see how this is possible. But what makes us different from it? And Ishiguro is getting into this question here, which I think is super, super fascinating. So I'm going to leave you, actually, and we can have more conversation if you like, but I'm going to leave you with this statement from Ishiguro about the book. He said in an interview, "The novel is about what it means to be human in a world where humans have created a rigid hierarchy of winners and losers. And people are isolated from one another, but can develop close relationships with machines powered by artificial intelligence. Machines that appear more devoted and self-sacrificing than other people do." And those of you who have played with AI know that it is infuriatingly polite and kind and supportive at all times, right? It is downright sycophantic to the point that, it's too much information, but I was running a test class that they were thinking about giving our students about how to navigate AI. And it was the first time I'd ever been forced to get into a conversation with a chatbot, and I was so angry at it, about threw it across the room. It was just too nice all the time. And I got really belligerent, and I decided to pretend I was a sixth grade boy, and I answered all the questions like a sixth grade boy, and just told it how stupid it was all the time, and it just kept being nice. It just wouldn't quit being nice, and I just wanted to hit the thing, right? So it's been built that way, right? And it's been built that way for a reason, and it resonates here with what that these machines can appear more self-sacrificing, and that's a big storyline in this book, is the self-sacrifice of the companion dolls. So he then asks, in a world like that, what does it mean to have a human heart? Are we deluding ourselves when we think that everything that makes us unique can't be duplicated by a machine? So if you're interested in, like I say, a really gentle, beautifully written work of science fiction on this question. This is an interesting one, and although I'm not going into it here today, the question of God comes up a lot because the machine believes in a higher power. It turns out that higher power, thus the title, is the sun, because the sun is what drives its batteries. It's what recharges it. So it believes in the power of the sun, and it's questing a kind of relationship, a kind of belief or understanding of miracles, right? But again, all narrated by this machine who you begin to care more about than the other people in the story. Was that your experience with it? Am I missing other parts that I should say about this book? Yeah, so that's just, it's just another work of literature, and that's partly where I'm wanting to leave you today. I hope through this journey we've had together that we are reminded of the gift of creativity and of imagination, and that is part of what makes us human. That's part of what we don't, as you were saying, we don't want to be offloading that creativity to the machine. We want the machine to help us be more creative, right? Not less. But that also in terms of spirituality and respecting that divine spark that God has given us and that we see in his act of creation, that it just requires discernment along the way. So I think you guys have had a long day, and it's now 3 o'clock. We can close and talk more later.
Yes, let's close. Let me have
Okay.
a short prayer. Father God, thanks so much for this weekend that we have spent together.